The drive back to Seattle was unusually quiet. After the business summit, Adrian and Natalie sat in the back of the company car while the city lights blurred past the windows. Adrian noticed Natalie staring out into the darkness. "You've been quiet ever since the reception." Natalie smiled faintly. "I'm just thinking." "About Brandon?" She turned to him, surprised. "Was it that obvious?" Adrian nodded. "I saw the two of you talking on the balcony." He paused for a moment. "You don't have to tell me anything if you'd rather not." Natalie looked down at her hands. "No. I think it's time someone heard the whole story." The car continued through the rain-soaked streets as Natalie took a deep breath. "When I met Brandon, we were both broke college students." She smiled at the memory. "He was kind, funny, and full of dreams." Adrian listened without interrupting. "We got married young." She continued, her voice calm but emotional. "I believed in him with everything I had. I worked 2 jobs so he could finish graduate school. I paid our rent. I sold my mother's jewelry to help cover his tuition." Adrian's expression slowly changed. "He accepted every sacrifice I made." She nodded. "And I never complained because I believed we were building a future together." Her eyes became glossy. "The day he got the career he'd always wanted." She stopped for a moment. "He decided he no longer wanted me." Silence filled the car. "He said I didn't fit into his world anymore." Adrian looked away, trying to hide the anger that flashed across his face. "I've met a lot of successful people," he said quietly. "But I've never understood how someone could forget the person who helped them reach the top." Natalie smiled sadly. "For a long time I blamed myself. I thought maybe I wasn't smart enough. Pretty enough. Successful enough." She shook her head. "But then I came to Sullivan Global." She looked at Adrian. "You gave me opportunities to discover who I really was." Adrian smiled gently. "No, Natalie. You already had those qualities. I simply gave you the chance to use them." Tears filled Natalie's eyes. "Thank you." The car stopped outside Aunt Margaret's cottage. Before Natalie stepped out, Adrian spoke again. "May I ask you one more question?" She nodded. "Do you still love him?" Natalie thought carefully before answering. "I'll always be grateful for the good memories we shared." She smiled softly. "But I'm no longer in love with the man he became." Adrian felt an unexpected sense of relief. Natalie opened the car door. "Good night, Adrian." "Good night, Natalie." As she walked toward the cottage, Adrian remained in the car, watching until she reached the front porch safely. The driver glanced into the rearview mirror. "Home, sir?" Adrian smiled. "Yes." But during the drive home, his thoughts never left Natalie. He admired her intelligence. He respected her strength. And after hearing everything she had endured, he realized his feelings had quietly grown into something much deeper than admiration. He wasn't simply proud of her anymore. He was falling in love with her. Meanwhile, inside the cottage, Aunt Margaret was waiting with 2 cups of hot tea. "How was the conference?" she asked. Natalie smiled as she sat down. "It was wonderful." Margaret noticed the thoughtful look in her eyes. "And Adrian?" Natalie looked into her teacup. "He's one of the kindest people I've ever met." Margaret smiled knowingly. Kindness has a way of finding people who need it most. Natalie didn't answer. But as she replayed the evening in her mind, she realized something had changed. For the first time since her divorce, thinking about the future no longer frightened her. Because somewhere along the way, someone had quietly become part of it. The weeks following the business summit were the hardest Brandon had ever experienced. He tried to focus on work, but his mind constantly drifted back to his conversation with Natalie. Her words echoed in his head every day. "I forgave you, but I'm not going back." For the first time, he understood that he hadn't just lost his marriage. He had lost the woman who had loved him without conditions. Unfortunately, his personal regrets were only the beginning. One Monday morning, Brandon was called into the executive conference room at Preston and Blake Financial Group. Charles Whitmore stood at the front with several board members. The atmosphere was tense. Charles looked directly at Brandon. "We've completed our internal review." Brandon frowned. "Review?" Charles nodded. "We've lost 5 major clients in the last quarter." He placed several reports on the table. "Revenue is down, and our shareholders are demanding answers." Brandon took a deep breath. "I know things have been difficult, but I'm already working on a recovery plan." One of the board members shook his head. "The board has decided to restructure the management team." Brandon's stomach tightened. "What does that mean?" Charles spoke gently. "It means you'll no longer serve as regional director." The room fell silent. "We're reassigning you to a lower management position." Brandon felt as though the floor had disappeared beneath him. After years of climbing the corporate ladder, he had just been demoted. He quietly collected the papers in front of him. "I understand." Charles sighed. "I truly hope you find your footing again." Without another word, Brandon walked out of the conference room. For the first time in years, he felt completely defeated. That evening, Brandon returned to the luxury apartment. The lights were off. Vanessa's designer handbags were gone. So were her shoes. Her closet was almost empty. Confused, Brandon called her phone. She answered after the 3rd ring. "Hello? Vanessa, where are you?" "I'm moving." His heart skipped a beat. "What do you mean?" "I moved out this afternoon." Brandon couldn't believe what he was hearing. "Why?" Vanessa sighed. "I don't think this relationship is working anymore." "Is this because I was demoted?" There was a long silence. Finally, she answered. "I didn't sign up for this kind of life." Brandon closed his eyes. "So, that's it?" "I've met someone else." The words hit him like a freight train. "What?" "His name is Victor. He's an investment partner." Brandon felt sick. "How long?" "A few months." The room spun around him. "You've been cheating on me." Vanessa didn't deny it. "I think it's best if we both move on." The call ended. Brandon slowly lowered the phone. The silence inside the apartment was deafening. He remembered how he had once justified cheating on Natalie by telling himself he had found someone who understood him. Now, he had become the one being betrayed. He sank onto the couch and buried his face in his hands. For the first time in his life, he truly understood the pain he had caused Natalie. Not just the betrayal, but the humiliation, the loneliness, the feeling of being replaced. Tears rolled down his face. "I deserve this," he whispered. Across the city, life looked very different for Natalie. She was helping Aunt Margaret test recipes for a new cinnamon roll she'd been perfecting. The kitchen was filled with laughter. "You've added too much vanilla," Margaret teased. Natalie laughed. "I thought you'd say not enough." The timer chimed. Margaret pulled the tray from the oven. The warm aroma filled the room. She smiled proudly. "One day, people are going to line up outside your bakery for these." Natalie smiled as she looked at the golden pastries. For the first time. She paused. "I actually believe that." As the two women laughed together, Brandon sat alone in his empty apartment, surrounded by silence. One life was healing. The other was unraveling. And destiny was preparing to bring them together one final time. Nearly 6 months had passed since Natalie had walked into Sullivan Global Holdings for her interview. The woman who had once doubted herself had become one of the company's most respected executives. She smiled more. She laughed more. Most importantly, she had learned to trust herself again. One Friday afternoon, Adrian knocked gently on the door of her office. Do you have plans this weekend? Natalie looked up from her laptop. Nothing besides helping Aunt Margaret in her garden. Adrian smiled. Would you have dinner with me tomorrow evening? Natalie blinked. Dinner? He nodded. Not as your CEO. He took a slow breath. As a man who enjoys your company. For a moment, the room became very quiet. Natalie searched his eyes. There was no pressure. No expectation. Only sincerity. She smiled softly. I'd like that. The following evening, Adrian picked Natalie up from Aunt Margaret's cottage. When Margaret answered the door, she couldn't hide her smile. So, you're Adrian. He laughed. I've heard wonderful things about you. And I've heard even better things about you. Natalie laughed as the two of them instantly got along. Should I be worried you're becoming friends already? Margaret winked. Only if you keep him waiting. Adrian took Natalie to a quiet restaurant overlooking Puget Sound. Unlike the extravagant places Brandon had once insisted on visiting, this restaurant felt peaceful. There was soft piano music, warm candlelight, and breathtaking views of the water. I come here whenever I need to think, Adrian admitted. I can see why. For the first hour, they talked about everything except work. Their childhood memories. Favorite books. Travel dreams. Embarrassing college stories. Natalie realized she hadn't laughed this much in years. As dessert arrived, Adrian became unusually quiet. Natalie. She looked at him. I've been trying to find the right words for weeks. He smiled nervously. Turns out, there aren't any perfect ones. She waited patiently. When you first joined Sullivan Global, I admired your work ethic. He paused. Then I admired your courage. And somewhere along the way. He looked into her eyes. I fell in love with the woman you are. Natalie's heart skipped a beat. I wasn't looking for love. Neither was I. He continued gently. I know you've been hurt. I know trusting someone again isn't easy. He reached across the table but stopped, giving her the choice. I'm not asking you to forget your past. I'm asking if you'd allow me to be part of your future. Tears filled Natalie's eyes. For a long moment, she said nothing. She thought about the woman she had been. The woman who believed she wasn't enough. Then she thought about the woman she had become. Strong. Confident. Hopeful. She slowly placed her hand in his. You know what scares me the most? What? Loving someone again. Adrian nodded. I understand. She smiled through her tears. But I also know something now that I didn't know before. He waited quietly. My happiness doesn't depend on another person. She squeezed his hand gently. It depends on choosing someone who adds to it. A hopeful smile spread across Adrian's face. And? She laughed softly. I think you do. Adrian's eyes brightened. Is that a yes? Natalie nodded. It's a yes. The relief on Adrian's face made her laugh again. He wasn't the confident CEO everyone else saw. At that moment. He was simply a man who had fallen deeply in love. 2 months later. Adrian invited Natalie to spend the weekend at a quiet lakeside resort. After a peaceful walk along the shore at sunset, he stopped beneath a large oak tree. I have one more question. Natalie smiled. I had a feeling you did. He reached into his jacket pocket and removed a small velvet box. Then, without hesitation, he knelt on one knee. Natalie Hayes. You taught me that true strength comes from kindness. You reminded me that success means nothing if there's no one to share it with. You've made my life better in every possible way. He opened the box, revealing a beautiful diamond ring. Will you marry me? Natalie covered her mouth as tears streamed down her cheeks. She had imagined this moment as a little girl. Then she had stopped believing it would ever happen. Now. It was real. She looked at Adrian. The man who had never tried to change her. The man who believed in her before asking for her heart. With tears of joy, she nodded. Yes. Yes, I'll marry you. Adrian slipped the ring onto her finger and stood, wrapping her in a warm embrace. As the sun disappeared below the horizon, Natalie realized something extraordinary. The greatest love of her life hadn't arrived when she was searching for it. It had found her. After she had finally learned to love herself. 6 months later. The gardens of the historic Willow Creek estate were glowing beneath the golden afternoon sun. White roses lined the stone walkway. Soft violin music floated through the air as family, close friends, and business associates gathered for one of the most anticipated weddings of the year. Natalie stood in the bridal suite, gazing at herself in the mirror. Her elegant ivory gown shimmered in the sunlight, and the feather pendant her late mother had once worn rested gently around her neck. Aunt Margaret adjusted the veil and smiled through happy tears. "You've never looked more beautiful." Natalie smiled. "I'm nervous." Margaret laughed softly. "That's because today isn't just about getting married." She gently squeezed Natalie's hands. "It's about beginning the life you deserve." A tear rolled down Natalie's cheek. "I wish my mother could see this." Margaret embraced her tightly. "Oh, sweetheart. I think she can." Outside, Adrian stood beneath a floral arch, greeting guests with Robert, Karen, and Ethan. "You've checked your watch at least 20 times, Ethan teased. Adrian smiled sheepishly. "I just want everything to be perfect." "It already is." The music changed. Everyone rose to their feet. Natalie appeared at the end of the aisle. The moment Adrian saw her, his eyes filled with tears. She walked toward him with calm, graceful steps. Gone was the heartbroken woman who had once believed she wasn't enough. Today, she looked confident, radiant, whole. When she reached the altar, Adrian whispered, "You take my breath away." Natalie smiled. "So do you." The ceremony was simple but deeply meaningful. When it came time to exchange vows, Adrian spoke first. "Natalie, from the moment you walked into my company, I admired your courage." He smiled warmly. "But today, I promise to spend the rest of my life admiring your heart." Natalie's eyes glistened with tears. When it was her turn, she took a deep breath. "Adrian. I once believed love meant sacrificing everything for someone else." She looked into his eyes. "You showed me that real love lifts people up instead of breaking them down. I promise to stand beside you through every joy and every challenge." "I choose you." She smiled through her tears. "Today and every day after." The officiant looked at them warmly. "By the authority vested in me, I now pronounce you husband and wife. You may kiss your bride." As Adrian kissed Natalie, applause erupted throughout the garden. For the first time in many years, Natalie felt completely at peace. 3 months later, Preston and Blake Financial Group desperately needed financial support after losing several major clients. Their only realistic option was to seek a strategic partnership with Sullivan Global Holdings. Brandon had been assigned to attend the negotiations. As he entered Sullivan Global's executive boardroom, he adjusted his tie and tried to steady his nerves. The door opened. He stepped inside. Adrian was already seated at the head of the table. Several executives sat on either side. Then Brandon noticed the woman sitting beside Adrian. Natalie. She was reviewing financial reports with complete confidence. Adrian looked up and smiled. "Good morning, everyone." He glanced toward Natalie. "My wife has already reviewed your proposal." Brandon felt his heart stop. "My wife?" Adrian nodded proudly. "I'd like to introduce Mrs. Natalie Sullivan." The words echoed through Brandon's mind. He stared at the wedding ring on Natalie's finger. The room suddenly felt smaller. The woman he had once abandoned was now sitting beside one of the most respected CEOs in the country. Not behind him. Beside him. As an equal. Throughout the meeting, Natalie spoke with calm authority, asking thoughtful questions and offering practical solutions. Every executive listened carefully. When the meeting ended, Brandon remained behind. Natalie. She turned. I owe you more than an apology. She looked at him quietly. I lost everything that mattered because I was too blind to appreciate what I had. He lowered his head. I know I don't deserve forgiveness. Natalie smiled gently. I forgave you a long time ago. He looked up hopefully. But. She glanced toward Adrian, who was waiting patiently by the door. My future is with the man who believed in me when I was still learning to believe in myself. Brandon nodded slowly. A tear escaped his eye. I understand. He watched as Adrian reached for Natalie's hand. Together, they walked out of the boardroom. Brandon remained standing alone. For the first time, he truly understood that success wasn't measured by wealth, titles, or prestige. It was measured by the people who chose to stand beside you. And he had once let the greatest person in his life walk away. 2 years later. The early morning sun cast a golden glow over downtown Seattle as people lined up outside a charming corner bakery with elegant white walls and large glass windows. Above the entrance hung a beautiful wooden sign. Natalie's Oven. The sweet aroma of fresh cinnamon rolls, buttery croissants, and warm bread filled the air. Inside the bakery, Natalie stood behind the counter wearing a light blue apron over a simple dress. She smiled as she carefully placed another tray of cinnamon rolls into the display case. Good morning, she greeted the waiting customers. One little girl pointed excitedly. Mommy, I want the cinnamon rolls. Natalie laughed. They're fresh out of the oven. Within an hour, nearly every pastry had been sold. Watching from a nearby table was Adrian. He smiled proudly as another customer complimented Natalie's baking. I've never tasted cinnamon rolls this good, an elderly man said. My wife and I drive almost an hour every Saturday just to buy them. Natalie's eyes filled with gratitude. Thank you. That means so much to me. As the morning rush slowed, Adrian walked over carrying 2 cups of coffee. Business seems pretty good. Natalie laughed. We're almost sold out before noon. I told you people would line up for your baking. She smiled. You did. And you believed in me before I believed in myself. Adrian gently took her hand. You did all of this? No, Natalie replied, smiling warmly. We did. That afternoon, Aunt Margaret arrived carrying a bouquet of fresh flowers. She looked around the busy bakery before turning to Natalie. Do you remember the day you moved into my house? Natalie nodded. I thought my life was over. Margaret smiled through happy tears. And now? Natalie looked around the bakery. She glanced toward Adrian, who was laughing with a group of customers. She smiled. Now I know it was only beginning. Margaret hugged her tightly. I've never been more proud of you. Across town. Brandon walked through a quiet neighborhood after finishing another ordinary workday. Life had changed dramatically. After his demotion, he eventually accepted a position at a smaller financial consulting firm. The salary was modest. The office was smaller. But for the first time in years, he had learned humility. As he passed a local bookstore, a familiar magazine in the window caught his attention. The cover featured a smiling Natalie standing outside her bakery beside Adrian. The headline read, From Heartbreak to Success, How One Woman Rebuilt Her Life Without Losing Her Kindness. Brandon smiled sadly. There was no jealousy left in his heart. Only gratitude that Natalie had found the happiness he had once failed to protect. He whispered softly. You deserved every bit of it. Then he continued walking. Not toward his past, but toward the future he still had the chance to build. That evening, as the bakery closed, Adrian locked the front door. Natalie switched off the lights and looked around the cozy shop she had once believed would exist only in her dreams. She leaned against Adrian's shoulder. Do you ever think about how close we came to never meeting? Adrian smiled. Sometimes. She looked out through the bakery window at the quiet street. If Brandon hadn't left me, I never would have discovered who I really was. Adrian gently kissed her forehead. And I never would have met the woman who changed my life. Natalie smiled as they walked hand in hand toward their car. The city lights shimmered in the distance. Her journey had begun with heartbreak. It had passed through loneliness, doubt, and pain. But those difficult moments had led her to a life filled with love, purpose, and peace. Sometimes the greatest blessings arrive disguised as the worst days of our lives. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell so you never miss another heartwarming story. Tell us in the comments, what would you have done if you were Natalie? Would you have given Brandon a second chance, or would you have chosen the path she did? We'd love to read your thoughts. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the next inspiring story.